Hello there. After quite a long break, we're resuming our journey through the Psalms, and we've reached Psalm 97. We're currently working our way through a group of Psalms that's often called the Enthronement Psalms. They go from Psalm 93 up to Psalm 100, and they celebrate and declare the absolute sovereignty of God over all of his creation. Each one throws a slightly different light on that subject, but they all proclaim the same message, that God is King. In verse 1 of Psalm 97, God is sovereign. The psalm begins by echoing verses 10 and 11 of Psalm 95. And actually this opening verse of Psalm 97 not only sums up the message of the psalm itself, but in many ways is a summary of all of these enthronement psalms. And the fact of the unconditional sovereignty of God is a cause for great rejoicing by every part of the universe that he's made. After all, because God is sovereign and because he's in control of all things, we have nothing to fear. Nothing in the entire universe can limit or thwart his purposes and his actions. If God is not sovereign over all, then God is not really sovereign at all. Then in verses 2 to 7, God is awesome. What graphic and vivid pictures the psalmist paints here as he tries to depict the awesome majesty of God. I know the word awesome is greatly overused today, but if there's one fitting use for this adjective, surely it is as we think about our sovereign God. You see, far from being the politically correct and largely impotent being imagined by the secular world and even preached by the liberal church, to encounter this God is always to be face to face with the blazing majesty of the living God. Our instinctive reaction should be that of Daniel in chapter 7 or John in Revelation 1, where we feel that the very breath is being sucked out of our bodies and our knees buckle underneath us. So God is the awesome God. In verses 8 to 9, God is a just God. A God this powerful and this sovereign would be terrifying if it were not for the fact that he is a holy, righteous and just God. That's why her people, described in verse 8 as Zion and the daughters of Judah, that's why they rejoice. You see, our God is a God who guarantees that in his time, and not always in ours, he will execute perfect justice on all the inhabitants of the world. In this life, many appear to get away with their wickedness. But in God's timing and from his perspective, no one escapes his judgment. Now, of course, we who are his redeemed, we who are his blood-bought children, we have been saved through faith in his own son Jesus, we do escape this fearful judgment. Because by his dying on the cross, Jesus experienced the wrath of God instead of us. And there is, as Paul tells the Romans, now, no condemnation for those of us who are in Christ Jesus. So God is sovereign, God is awesome, God is just. And then the psalm closes with verses of application, verses 10 to 12. God's people, this God's people, hate evil and rejoice. You see, to truly believe in this God, this sovereign, awesome, just God, will produce two responses in us. First of all, in verse 10, we will hate what he hates. We will hate evil. Because evil in all its manifestations is so directly contrary to the character of this sovereign, awesome, and just God. As Stephen Lawson puts it in his excellent commentary on this psalm, he says, to the extent that a person loves the Lord, he will hate evil. Whenever a person compromises with evil, it is only because he or she has become lukewarm toward God. And then in verses 11 and 12, not only will we hate evil, but we will rejoice in God because he delivers us from harm. And day by day, he enlightens our minds and hearts to grow in our understanding and knowledge of who he is. Friends, I believe it was Tozer who said, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. He might well have been meditating on Psalm 97 when he wrote these words. And surely if anything is needed by Christians in the church in our days, it is a fresh, breathtaking, jaw-dropping, mind-boggling awareness of who God is. Please join me next time when we're going to look, God willing, at Psalm 98. And until then, the Lord bless you and the Lord keep you.